This is a political earthquake. A sitting governor just admitted to discussing a state's secession with the federal government. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem has confirmed, in her own words, that she discussed the insurrection in Minnesota with its governor, but she says there are no plans to pull out. What does that even mean? Is this a constitutional crisis in the making or political theater? Some say this is treasonous talk. Others call it a legitimate states' rights conversation. Who's right? This is Kenya News Update today, and we're diving deep into a story that could redefine the American Union. To understand why this statement is explosive, you need the context. The United States was forged in a civil war fought over the very idea of secession. The South's attempt to leave the Union led to over 600,000 deaths. Since then, the permanence of the Union has been a bedrock principle. Fast forward to today, we are in a period of extreme political polarization. Red states and blue states are increasingly acting like separate nations, passing contradictory laws on everything from abortion to immigration to energy. Enter the key players. Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, a former governor of South Dakota known for her fierce, conservative stances. Her job is to protect the homeland from threats. And then we have Minnesota, a state with a Democratic governor and a politically divided population, but with a growing, vocal movement centered in its rural areas that feels alienated by federal and even state-level policies. This movement has, at its fringes, talked about the idea of greater autonomy or even secession, often referencing the insurrection of 1861. The timeline is critical. In recent months, tensions have spiked over federal mandates. The insurrection discussion didn't happen in a vacuum. It follows a series of controversial federal court rulings applied to Minnesota, federal environmental regulations hitting its mining and agricultural sectors hard, and a growing cultural rift. Noem's admission is the first time a high-ranking federal official has publicly acknowledged engaging with a state on this historically taboo subject. The central controversy is clear. Is this a dangerous normalization of separatist rhetoric, or a necessary, if uncomfortable, dialogue between a state and its federal government? Let's start with the perspective of those who see Noem's discussion as legitimate, even necessary. Supporters argue this is the essence of federalism in action. The United States is a republic of sovereign states that granted specific powers to the federal government. Proponents point out that the 10th Amendment reserves all powers not delegated to the federal government to the states. They say when the federal government overreaches, states have not just a right, but a duty to push back. Who supports this view? Constitutional originalists, many states' rights advocates, and a significant portion of the population in regions like Greater Minnesota who feel their way of life is under direct attack by coastal elites and federal bureaucrats. Their strongest argument? Look at the practical impact. A farmer in Minnesota watching his costs skyrocket due to federal emissions regulations feels the federal government is no longer representing his interests. A small business owner buried in federal paperwork sees D.C. as an oppressive force. For them, discussing the boundaries of that relationship, even using strong historical language like insurrection, is a form of political speech and a check on power. Official statements from the side frame it as dialogue. Noem herself said, "We did discuss the insurrection." She didn't condemn the conversation, she stated it as fact. Supporters highlight the second part of her statement, no plans to pull out. They argue this shows the discussion was a pressure release valve, a way to air grievances within the system to prevent actual rupture. They point to historical precedents like the nullification crisis of 1832, where South Carolina challenged federal tariffs, arguing that such confrontations, when managed, strengthen the Union by forcing a re-examination of the balance of power. The core of their position, ignoring this level of discontent, is more dangerous than talking about it. But wait, there's another side to this story. Critics, however, see it differently. They view this as an appalling and reckless breach of duty from the nation's top Homeland Security official. Opponents counter that the Department of Homeland Security was created after 9/11 to protect against threats to the domestic security of the United States. How, they ask, can its secretary entertain a conversation about a state leaving that very union? They see this as the federal government legitimizing sedition. Who is criticizing? Constitutional scholars, national security experts, many political figures from both parties who prioritize Union stability, and citizens who see the Civil War as a settled historical and legal matter. Their strongest counterarguments are legal and moral. The Supreme Court, in Texas v. White, ruled that states cannot unilaterally secede. The Union is indissoluble. By discussing insurrection as a political concept with a state governor, Critics argue Noem is undermining the supreme law of the land she swore to uphold. They point to the evidence of the impact of this rhetoric. It emboldens extremist groups who literally believe in a national divorce. It destabilizes the market. Why would a company invest heavily in a state where political leaders are flirting with secession talk? It fractures national unity on issues like defense and disaster response. Skeptics point out the dangerous ambiguity. What does no plans to pull out mean? Does it imply plans could exist in the future? For critics, this isn't federalism, it's a slippery slope toward chaos. They argue true leadership would involve de-escalating such rhetoric, not participating in it. The other side argues this isn't about airing grievances, it's about planting the seed of an idea that nearly destroyed the nation once before. So who's right? Let's look at the evidence. Let's step back from the heated opinions. What does the data and expert analysis actually suggest? First, the polling. Nationally, talk of secession remains a fringe view. But when you zoom in, the numbers get interesting. A 2021 poll by the University of Virginia's Center for Politics found that 52% of Trump voters and 41% of Biden voters at least somewhat agreed with the idea of their state seceding to join a union of like-minded states. This isn't majority support for actual secession, but it reveals a shocking openness to the concept of breaking apart. Experts note that this sentiment is heavily driven by perception, not legal reality. Dr. Elaine Kamark, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, states, "The data suggests these feelings are a proxy for intense political alienation. People feel so disconnected from the opposing parties, voters, that physical separation feels like a solution." The evidence on the ground in Minnesota shows a clear economic and cultural divide. The state's prosperous, urban democratic strongholds like Minneapolis have vastly different economic bases and values from the struggling, rural regions talking about secession. International comparisons are sobering. Experts who study separatist movements in Europe and Canada point to a common precursor: the normalization of secessionist talk by mainstream political figures. Once that door is opened, it is incredibly difficult to close. Looking at the evidence of what such discussions cost, studies of uncertainty in political systems show that even vague talk of territorial integrity can reduce investment by 5–10% in affected regions. The data, therefore, paints a complex picture. While the legal case for secession is zero, the social and political conditions making the talk of it resonate are very real and growing. The evidence suggests Noem's discussion is less a legal negotiation and more a symptom of a deep, potentially dangerous national rift. The reality is more complex than either side admits. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Supporters of the dialogue are correct that ignoring profound state-level discontent is a strategic failure. Dismissing millions of citizens as traitors for feeling abandoned fuels the very fire you want to put out. However, critics are absolutely right on the law and the profound symbolic danger. A DHS secretary cannot be a neutral mediator in a discussion about the dissolution of her own jurisdiction. It's a fundamental conflict of interest. What most people miss is the semantic game being played. The word insurrection is doing heavy lifting. For rural Minnesotans, it may metaphorically represent standing up to an oppressive government. In the halls of D.C. and in history books, it has one meaning: armed rebellion against the United States. By using that word, Noem either displayed catastrophic poor judgment or intentionally used a charged term to signal solidarity with a specific political base, leveraging a national security office for political ends. The nuance is this: the grievance is real and deserves a forum. But the forum cannot be the Department of Homeland Security, and the vocabulary cannot be that of civil war. The verdict? This is likely more about politics than policy. It's about signaling, fundraising, and positioning within a fractured political landscape. But the great danger is that playing with these matches near the tinder of national division can start a fire no one can control. The legal verdict is clear: no secession. The political verdict is that we are in uncharted, deeply unstable waters. So how does this affect ordinary people? If you're in Minnesota, this rhetoric could impact your property values, your business's future, and the cohesion of your community. It pours gasoline on the urban-rural culture war within the state. For Americans everywhere, it makes the union feel less permanent, which affects everything from long-term retirement investments to the shared sense of national purpose needed to tackle crises like pandemics or climate change. It creates a background anxiety that the fundamental structure of the country is negotiable. What to watch for next? First, the political fallout. Will there be calls for Noem's resignation? Second, will other governors in politically divided states initiate similar discussions? Third, and most importantly, watch the investment and migration data. If businesses or families start making decisions based on political stability, that's the canary in the coal mine. Predictions for the future. This type of rhetoric will continue and likely escalate in the lead up to the next presidential election, used as a mobilization tool. The real test will be whether it remains just talk, or if it starts manifesting in tangible refusals to comply with federal law. So the central debate stands: is discussing secession a safe release valve or a dangerous spark? The line between addressing grievance and legitimizing division has never been thinner. Now I want to hear from you. Are you Team A, this is necessary federal dialogue? Or Team B, this is reckless and dangerous? Drop a comment below. Let's get a debate going. Share this with someone who needs to see both sides of this explosive story. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for more breaking news and deep dive analysis like this.